Welcome to Adult ypww for December 11th, 2022. I do not own the rights to this music. Our lesson text is coming out of Exodus chapter 2, verses 11 through 15. Today's topic is the suffering of Moses. Exodus chapter 2, verses 11 through 15. This is the King James Version. And it came to pass in those days, when Moses was grown, that he went out unto his brethren, and looked on their burdens. And he spied an Egyptian smiting a Hebrew, one of his brethren. And he looked this way and that way, and when he saw that there was no man, he slew the Egyptian, and hid him in the sand. And when he went out the second day, behold, 2 men of the Hebrews strove together. And he said to him that did the wrong, Wherefore smitest thou thy fellow? And he said, Who made thee a prince and a judge over us? Intendest thou to kill me, as thou killest the Egyptian? And Moses feared and said, Surely this thing is known. Now when Pharaoh heard this thing, he sought to slay Moses. But Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh, and dwelt in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. The lesson aim: to show the church that taking a stand for God can often bring confrontations and even suffering, but God's way is always the right way. The memory verse for today's lesson. I will read the King James Version and the NIV Version. By faith, Moses, when he was come to years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. The NIV Version of Hebrews chapter 11, verses 24 through 25. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. The action idea says take a few seconds and ask the class some of the results and persecutions they may have faced because of their uncompromising stand or their testimonies of faith. Some may still be facing persecution. Ask the class to take the time to pray for them. The introduction says, we know Moses as the great lawgiver, but do we know the route and time that it took for him to reach this level? We often preach, teach, and reflect upon his triumphs, but how often do we talk about his trials and sufferings? Not much is said about Moses' life growing up, except that he was raised in Pharaoh's palace. But he knew that the Egyptians were not his people. It was not until he went down the Hebrew slave road that he got a different perspective of what was happening as opposed to what he heard. Many times in our lives, the Lord allows us to go through certain things, or he reveals things to us that will cause us to see things from a different perspective. Too many times we only view things from a narrow frame of mind, or by what someone else has told us. However, the Lord wants to reveal things to us through experience. And sometimes that experience can only be gained through suffering. The discussion says, when Moses went down to the slave road, he saw an Egyptian slave driver beating a Hebrew slave. This angered Moses, and he killed the Egyptian, burying his body in the sand. It should have been noted that Moses was proud of his people and wanted very much for them to have a sense of dignity and self-esteem. We know this because the next day he saw 2 Hebrews fighting among themselves, and he immediately intervened, reminding them that they were brethren. Unfortunately, their responses was not what Moses expected. Intendest thou to kill me, as thou killest the Egyptian? Moses now knew that what he had done was known among everyone. So he fled for his life, fearing that Pharaoh would have him killed. The beginning of Moses' suffering was that he would leave the comfort and security of Pharaoh's palace to the uncertainty of the desert. Moses met his wife, Zipporah, and lived with his father-in-law, Jethro, in obscurity for several years until one day God called to him from a burning bush. When God sent him to Egypt, it was the beginning of a long time of trouble and frustration for Moses, not just because of the hardening of Pharaoh's heart, but often the children of Israel, the very ones whom Moses was sent to deliver, murmured, complained, accused Moses of all sorts of things, and were stubborn, hard-headed, and rebellious. The application says, the price of leadership often carries a great burden. Leaders like Moses were accused of many things, yet he continued to pray for them. His accusers even came from his own family, as Miriam and Aaron murmured against him because he married a woman outside of his tribe, not because she was black, as many erroneously believed, since Moses and the Israelites were all black. Yet after God smote Miriam with leprosy, Moses intervened for her. And that's found in Numbers chapter 12, verse 1, and then verses 13 to 14. Later, Moses spoke boldly before God on behalf of the entire nation when God was about to destroy them in the wilderness because of their hard hearts. And that's found in Exodus chapter 32, verse 32. How many times have we intervened to God on behalf of our families or even for our enemies, like Jesus told us? If one does not have a heart for leadership, it will be just a matter of time before the pressure of it will cause one to give up. Even Jesus, when he stood over Jerusalem, said, O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, which killest the prophets, and stonest them that are sent unto thee. How often would I have gathered thy children together, as a hen doth gather her brood under her wings, and ye would not. And that's found in Luke chapter 13, verse 34. The lesson illustration. The late novelist Richard Wright's classic novel Native Son tells the story of a troubled, angry black youth named Bigger Thomas. After accidentally killing a young white woman, he realized that he could never explain how it happened because of the racism of the time. Instead, he tried to use the situation to extort money from the young woman's family. Thomas was eventually caught and executed for his crime. But Mr. Wright was trying to show that the racism of the time would not allow a black man to explain the accident. The novel was based on a real incident in Chicago during the 30s. Often, situations in our lives cannot be explained. The more we try, the worse we can make it. It is best to simply hold one's peace and let time reveal all lies and verify all truths. There is a saying, when you tell the truth, you never have to remember what you said. The questions for today's lesson. And you can write down your answers and search the scriptures on your own. Question 1. What are some of the benefits of personal trials and tribulations? Question 2. How did Moses' visit down to Slave Row affect his perspective? Question 3. Where were the Hebrews ready to accept Moses' leadership? Question 4. What are some of the burdens of leadership? Question 5. Why did Aaron and Miriam speak against Moses? And number 6. Explain. When you tell the truth, you never have to remember what you said. Number 6 wants you to explain that. That is the end of our lesson. God bless you and continue to search the scriptures.